On behalf of Globe Advisors and their valued sponsor, Momentum Conferencing, I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar on how to create the winning pitch for investors and prospective clients. Today's presentation is presented by Big Picture Communication, who work with progressive companies that have environmental, social, and economic sustainability. And for over 20 years, the Globe Group and Globe Advisors have assisted small, medium, and large organizations to grow to their full business potential while adapting to the changing requirements of business and the environment. Globe's core focus has always been in the area of environmental sustainability and climate change. We are very pleased to be able to offer you the first in a series of training webinars which will highlight the key elements for delivering an effective pitch to your company's prospective investor or client. As always, it is appreciated, your attendance is appreciated this morning, and we look forward to engaging in a dynamic question and answer series at the end of this presentation. I would like now to introduce Jason Stees and Mark Heilig. And gentlemen, it's all yours.
Thanks, William. Yeah, thank you. Good morning. It's Mark here. Welcome. So, Mark here from the Globe Group. On behalf of the Globe Group, I just wanted to let you all know that today's webinar has been made possible through the generous support and sponsorship provided by Momentum Conferencing. Momentum Conferencing really is your solution to a comprehensive suite of audio, video, and web-based teleconferencing services. Momentum Conferencing specializes, for example, in group communication. This includes audio, web, video, and broadcast media, also known as streaming events. Momentum Conferencing is ultimately a consultancy for easy-to-use business class conferencing. Momentum is strategically partnered with the 3 largest mega providers and offers only the best-in-class business-grade platforms available. Because of these partnerships, Momentum can place your business in the best platform available to meet your needs. Momentum Teleconferencing prides itself on 5-star customer service. In fact, Momentum guarantees it. Bottom line, if you're not satisfied, Momentum is not satisfied. For further information, call Momentum at 1-888-551-5925. Push the option 1 and speak to the consultant today. And if you mention this Globe Group webinar today, you'll also receive a preferential rate at any of Momentum services. So thanks again, Momentum. We really appreciate that. And over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Mark. And just quickly, thanks to Globe, Frank and Mark for having me in to do this. I'm going to jump right in. The mix of public speaking combined with the stress of a job interview or loan application makes pitching not necessarily the most enjoyable activity for a lot of people. But if you truly know your business or product or service and you're well prepared, then giving a pitch is the best possible opportunity you'll have to deliver your message directly, clearly, and on your terms to a receptive audience. So I want you to think of a pitch as an opportunity to be embraced. And the goal of this webinar is to help you be well prepared. If there's one key message I want to weave through this thing, it's that the purpose of your pitch is to sell, not to teach. You have a limited amount of time, so you should save the details for the next meeting and your business plan. Use your time to excite, not educate. So with that in mind, let's look at what we're going to cover. Basically, there's sort of 6 core objectives here. Or 6 aspects to the webinar. We're going to review the core objectives quickly, the sales pitch versus fundraising pitch bit. Then we're going to get into the sort of the heart of it with the anatomy of a fundraising pitch. We'll finish up by talking about your message, your audience, identity, branding, and slide design, and then finally a little bit on delivering your presentation. I'm going to be covering a lot of ground, and I'm going to move pretty quickly. I won't dwell too long on any one point, but you can ask questions if you want for more clarification or get in touch with me afterwards for a follow-up, and you'll be able to download a copy of this webinar to watch again if you want. So let's start with a really basic breakdown of what you're trying to do in a pitch. To win over potential investors or buyers, your pitch has to accomplish three things. You have to tell a good story, position your company as a good match with other investments they've made, and come across as a better option than any other new investments they're currently considering. So, how do we do these things? First, with the story. What do we mean by a story? So if you think of any story, it's basically a challenge that's overcome. So you want to describe a relatable problem, something that the audience can recognize and understand themselves. You want to present your solution and then back it up with the supporting evidence. You want to position your company as a good match for them. To do this, you need to do your homework. You got to know the audience. Find out what their personal backgrounds and interests are, other investments they've backed, who they've turned down, do they have a philosophy or guiding principle or a specific area of passion that you can match. So use this information to position yourself. And thirdly, you want to show that you're a better investment option than your competitors. This is your product or service, but it's also you and your business model. You really have to know your stuff, keep it short, to the point, and grab their attention. And that's what we're going to talk about in this webinar. The last thing I just want to mention on this sort of objectives area here is that the focal point is on you. The natural assumption may be that the investor is most interested in your product or service, and that may be the case for a sales pitch, but it doesn't apply as much for a fundraising pitch, because what they're actually interested in is you and your team. They see a lot of good opportunities regularly. They want something that matches their definition of a good investment. And the only way they're going to know whether it's you is by what you say and how you say it. So we're going to jump into part two here, the sales pitch versus the fundraising pitch part. There's as many different ways to present a sales pitch as there are things to sell. Sales is an established craft, and there are countless books you can read and courses you can take on the art of sales. It's beyond the scope of this webinar to tell you specifically how to sell your products or services, because sales pitches are much less prescriptive than a fundraising pitch, but there are a few considerations. The most significant thing is that with a sales pitch, you're selling your product or service, whereas in a fundraising pitch, you're selling your company, which is a completely different value proposition. The main focus of the webinar is on fundraising pitches, but in a lot of cases, the same principles carry over, and hopefully it's obvious which ones. With regards to the similarities, in both cases, you're trying to make a connection and build rapport with your audience. In both cases, trust is a major factor, and much of the psychology in delivering a pitch carries over to both, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And finally, the general best practices for slide design and delivery remain the same for both, of course. As for the differences, well, a sales pitch is basically asking customers to trust what you do or what you build, whereas a fundraising pitch is asking someone to trust who you are and how you do it. Sales pitches are much more focused on the external benefits and details of the product or service, whereas fundraising pitches are a lot more exposing and vulnerable to you. But don't think of this as being in a position of weakness. Rather, view it as an exercise in transparency. You're proposing to go into business with these people, and they're going to want to know all about you, of course. So as we go through the breakdown of a fundraising pitch, you should be able to recognize which aspects apply to sales pitches as well. And finally, just really quickly to touch on this elevator pitch, this is the ultra-condensed version. That's usually more of an introduction and a summary of the problem and your solution. It might include a bit of background on who you are and your team and some very high-level mention of the market or any traction you have. But this is not the time to ask for money. You're just trying to spark interest. The cardinal rule here is to get it under a minute and try to get commitment for a follow-up. And practice, because it will be the pitch you deliver most frequently, and it may be your best chance to secure the opportunity to deliver a full pitch. So that's kind of the intro stuff. We're going to dive right in now to the anatomy of a fundraising pitch. And the first thing we want to think about is the investor's perspective. What do they want to see? So first off, because they're investing in you, they're looking for passion, commitment, and integrity in the founders. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. They're going to want to understand the market opportunity and the growth potential. If you catch their attention, they'll definitely be expecting to see a well-thought-out business plan that shows how you see the company developing. They'll want to see some evidence of traction, some indication that you're seeing some early successes. Of course, they'll be looking for solid intellectual property and an explanation of why it's unique. And they'll be expecting a very clear financial breakdown and a sense of valuation if they were to invest. Before we dive into the content, the specific content, I just want to mention the 10-20-30 rule. This is sort of the well-known golden rule of pitches. 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point font minimum. It's, of course, a rough guideline, but it's one worth sticking to, in spirit at least. 10 slides, it's easy to come up with more content, more slides, but try to resist the temptation to tell everything. The goal here is to pique the interest, gain their trust, make them want to know more, and set up the next meeting. 20 minutes, well, people have a short attention span and won't remember the details anyway. After about 20 minutes, no matter how interesting, people will start to fade. And 30-point font minimum. This rule is both for the ease of legibility in the audience, but also to make sure you don't try to put all your information on the slides. Again, you are the focal point, not the slides. Thankfully, this isn't a pitch because I'm going to probably break all those rules today. So what about those 10 slides? Well, each slide represents a different type of content. There are definitely different ideas around the content and its organization, but there's a pretty good general agreement overall on what needs to be included. You can deviate somewhat according to your own specific situation, but these 10 slides are a pretty good rule of thumb to stick to. They are your opening slide, where you're giving your introduction, the problem or opportunity, your solution, your value proposition, the business model, sales and marketing, competition, your team, projections, current status and timeline, and the money. Of course, the money's the big one, but usually gets saved to the end because you want to sort of front load it with all the reasons for them to say yes. So let's dive in and look at the details and some examples. First off, with the opening slide, ideally it's just the logo and the business name, maybe your tagline. Include a short title only if it's really necessary, but don't write something like a fundraising pitch by ABC Incorporated or whatever. Everyone knows why they're there. They know what the date is. They know where you are. So just go with the logo, just your brand name. For the first moment or two, you want all the focus on you and your introduction. So basically, you're trying not to give them something to read while you're talking. All right, the next problem. Oh, sorry. I found a few examples online that seem to represent pretty good ones. They're mostly from software development companies because they're the ones who tend to post their pitches, but they still carry over, so regardless of what kind of business you have. So just the logo. All right, number 2, this problem or opportunity. So basically you're looking at describing what issue you can solve. Try to boil it down to 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences maximum that summarize most instances of this problem. This is where you start to tell your story. Depending on your audience, you may ask them directly or by show of hands how many have experienced the problem. You're forcing some engagement there. Describe some other types of experiences with the same issue. And I just want to note as a sort of a side note here, strive to keep it realistic. This isn't a Tupperware infomercial, and over-exaggerating a minor inconvenience into a major crisis doesn't necessarily go over well. People do want solutions for minor inconveniences just as much as for big problems, so don't overstate the significance of the issue because people will still recognize the value. Took this one from Airbnb. They have a pretty good pitch deck out there. 3 sentences, nice and short, nice and tight. They've raised probably billions of dollars with this slide deck. All right, next, moving on, we've got the solution or value proposition. As your story switches from the problem to the solution, you want to switch slides for your big reveal. Now, picture an Apple keynote with Steve Jobs. He's talking against the black screen. He's sort of set the bar pretty high for this stuff, and sort of how we do it now. There's nothing on the screen behind him. It's just him on stage. This is the moment, the solution or value proposition, where the image of the new revolutionary, groundbreaking, or completely redesigned whatever product would be shown first. So if it's possible, show it. Don't describe it. Take a moment, pause briefly, let people connect the dots, draw their own conclusions. After you've presented your solution, touch on your IP, why it's unique. Show the product, but unless it's something really simple, don't attempt a live demo here. things can go wrong, and it'll definitely take too much time. Do mention what others have done, and also mention why your solution is better. This is your value proposition. Dwell a bit more here if it's required, but do keep it tight. There's a tendency at this stage to oversell the product. Remember, you're selling a business that creates your product, not the product itself. Another one from Airbnb. Again, they have a great deck, so I just grabbed 2 of them. 3 problem statements, 3 solutions. You know, in their slide, it's animated, so 1, 2, 3 sort of come on in sequence. But again, just the simplicity and clean design here, I think, is the takeaway. On to the business model. Push yourself to really summarize your business model into 2 sentences if you can. Leave out the variables, leave out the outlying cases, focus on the core of how you can turn your solution into a successful business. This is the key moment where you've already piqued their interest, and now you have to bring it back down to reality and demonstrate that you understand the way that the model will generate profits. State clearly the price per unit, touch briefly on a reasonable profit and expense breakdown, and acknowledge the barriers to entry, both for you and your competitors. Here's an example I found. I don't even actually know what company it was. Again, really quick, really, you know, not a lot of stuff. They're not reading off the slide. They're just giving you the brief overview. This other company I found has two of them. They give you the current one and then the sort of their value proposition here, or their business model rather. All right. At this point, you may choose to switch the order of the remaining slides to suit your model. It's important to cover all of the pieces, but you might want to play around and see what flows for you best. Just don't skip anything, even if you just touch on it lightly. The next one we're going to talk about is sales and marketing. Your business model only works, obviously, if people are buying what you're selling. So you have to address some really key points here. How big is the market? How do you plan to attract customers? What does your sales model and pipeline look like? Have you got any traction in the market already? Do you have any unique advantages of pre-existing systems or networks to draw on? Unlike the more fundamental slides prior to this, sales and marketing approaches can and probably should be constantly scrutinized, readjusted, and remain flexible. Your investors may well have better expertise in this area than you, so recognize that. Or they may have at least some solid advice or someone else to connect you with, so definitely be open to deviating from your early ideas around this part. You can see at this example, they don't actually say anything. It's just prompts, it's just cues for the presenter to sort of discuss their social media, their traditional media, their word of mouth and partnerships aspect of their sales and marketing. Moving on to the competition. Don't be naive and try to kid yourself or the investors. If you try to suggest there's no competitors, probably the rest of what you say won't be taken too seriously. Unless you have a truly revolutionary product, someone else somewhere is doing something very close to what you want to do. Investors understand this, and they see it as a signal that there's a viable market. This is not a weakness. You want to do your homework on who they are, what they're offering, how it's different, and where you fit in. Do you expect to compete directly, or are you looking at a subsector of their market or creating a new market? And don't forget, even if they do things the old way or have a completely different solution to the same problem, they're still competing for that same market, so don't write them off. 1, 2, 3, 3 groups of competitors. It's nice and quick. Again, you can see the trend here. Not a lot of content on the slides, just the basics. All right, the next one is the team. Who are the various people in charge of different aspects of the company? What are their qualifications? What's their business experience? And how many more new people will you be hiring, and how soon? What roles will they fill? What's your departmental structure? Do you have any strategic relationships beyond your core team? I just want to say, don't underestimate the significance of this section for investors. People make and break companies. People, not the business. It's the people that make and break the companies. So the right mix is crucial to protecting the investors' money and getting them a profit. You can see these guys have it's a small startup. They got 4 people. 1, 2, 3, 4, nice and clean. This could be a second slide, or it could be sort of a depending on your situation, a little bit bigger. They're listing their investors and their advisors as well. They probably had a slide before this with just the founders as well. So different examples. All right, next, projections. Everyone knows this is a highly variable aspect, most of all the investors, so be honest and be prepared for more questions on this later, but this is where you set your sights on the future. You're going to be asking, looking at traction and related analysis. Where are things headed for you in the company? What are your financial projections? Where are you getting your numbers? What are your key metrics? So how are you going to measure your success? Again, back up your numbers, show that you're realistic, but be prepared to, answer a little bit more about this later. On this one I found online, it was actually animated. It had a really nice sort of animated growth to the table and stuff. But again, just back to the point, it's quite simple. It's really a prompt. It's a supporting element. It's not the content itself. All right, next, status and timeline. What's your current status as a company? Where are you at with your production? You'll want to mention the last couple of years of your accomplishments, your financial status to date. You'll want to present a timeline with milestones for the next few months or a year or 2 years. Again, a little bit variable depending on your scenario. I really like this one. These guys have it sort of broken down. Here it is. It's just the key numbers and a pretty effective graph. Another one, this could go into a different section, but they're saying, like, basically at this stage they've raised this much money and here's who they've raised it from. So it's also kind of their status. Finally, we get to the money. Okay, this is the big one. This is the most important section. You might want to break this down into multiple slides, but be sure to keep it really high level because nobody's going to give you money without getting the details anyway. So during the pitch, you just want to give a solid high-level overview that'll make them want to meet further and read your business plan. The information you want to ask is stuff like, how much are you asking for, of course? How are you going to use the funds? So describe briefly how you'll spend the money and how long you expect it to last, as well as your monthly burn rate if you have an idea of that. How much have you invested so far personally? How about other investors? What's the valuation or share structure? Again, this is a topic for further meetings, but you do want to touch on it briefly. Management of risks. Exit strategies. And again, here, this is really critical, not just for the investors, but for you too. You may think that they'd want someone so passionate about their work that they'd never want to leave their own company. But in reality, they'd much rather see someone who's motivated by the same business considerations as their own. So don't ignore your own exit strategy as well. Here's a slide I found, probably a little low legibility factor, but again, simplicity, nice and clean. Another one with a little bit of financing history. I think you're getting the idea of sort of what we're going for. The idea being you're not writing everything on the screen. You're just the core information. Okay, you're going to wrap up with a closing slide. Again, keep it simple. Just your contact info, just your brand. Just like at the start, the focus should be on you only as you're wrapping up here. So an example I found, these guys have probably a little more information than necessary. If location is key, yeah, a map works well. If location doesn't factor in, no need to include it, I would say. And then you're going to have some follow-up questions, no doubt. Hopefully, anyway, if you've gained their attention and piqued their interest. Many of them will likely be around the finances, so you should be prepared to offer further explanations around issues such as your financial projections for the next 2 years, your assumptions that you're basing those projections on, costs for developing and delivering the product or service, and the unit economics, the estimated gross margins, customer acquisition costs, long-term value of customers. You may also face questions around your IP and your technology, but really try to keep your answers solution-oriented here. Offer to have another meeting or demo to display more specifics, but don't try to explain everything here. Your marketing and your advertising plan, PR strategy, sales cycle, all these kind of things. So with these follow-up questions, if you know the answer, be clear, be concise, say what you're planning to do. But if you don't, I would suggest you don't try to make something up on the spot. It's probably better to be honest about where your market research ends and admit that you understand the need for further development in these areas. All right, we're going to talk about a few things to avoid here. Basically, you want to, just try to watch out for these types of things. Failure to listen. The investor or potential buyer stops you and says something. Take the opportunity to really understand where they're coming from and adjust your approach accordingly, if that seems appropriate. Don't overlook the exit strategy for the investors. They want to know how and when they're going to get their money back. This is why they're there. Probably don't want to ask for an NDA right up front. You don't want to reveal all your IP secrets in a pitch, so save any talk of non-disclosure agreements for follow-up meetings. There are a lot of different opinions on this matter, and warranted or not, a lot of investors quite dislike NDAs, so just be careful and broach the subject carefully. You don't want to have an unrealistic valuation or a lack of flexibility around this topic. If you suggest a number too low, you won't appeal to their financial interests. Too high, and they'll think you're not being realistic. So, try to be confident, but remain flexible to having this challenged. And you don't want to have too much data. We'll get to this again in the slide design section, but the point is to keep your slides simple, easy to interpret. The fine print is for the business plan. So that's kind of the overview of all the slides. Kind of talked about what you want to have in it. We're now going to look a little bit at how you're going to craft your message and specifically to your audience as well. By this point, you should probably know exactly why your product or service has an advantage, not just in your mind, but in those of the buyers or investors. This is your unique selling proposition, of course, so make sure you figure this out and turn this into your key message. At the end of the day, you're either offering better cost, better quality, or better performance or options. Even if your IP has got more than one competitive advantage, you should probably know which one is the most important and weigh it heavier in your pitch. As a side note, it goes without saying at this point that you should have a pretty concrete business plan. Your pitch and your plan should match up in their core messages, especially around the IP and all that, and how you're going to make money. So once that plan is complete, take the time to create a really good executive summary and then draw from that to create core messages. What do I mean by core messages? Well, this is a really good exercise. You want to basically, try to summarize everything in a few different ways. One, you want a tagline. That's really handy. It goes everywhere. It can even go on your business card. 4 to 7, maybe 10 words maximum. It encompasses what you do. You probably want something like really tight 50-word description of the company and of your product. And then you want something in the range of anywhere from 500 to 1,000 word summary of the that articulates the value proposition, gives a bit more details, and talks about the problems that your IP solves. These are great for your social media profiles. Things like Twitter have much shorter and areas for this, and things like LinkedIn have much more room. So you want to use them in your social media profiles. You'll definitely want to use them on your website as well. And they should be what you say in an elevator pitch or when writing an introductory email. These messages probably should be revisited periodically, and try to use them consistently. You want to make them available for everyone in the company to access and encourage everyone to know, more or less, not memorize them necessarily, but have them pretty well figured out. Little thing that a lot of people don't necessarily think about is your voice. Are you, first person, third person? Do you want to talk about we, or do you want to talk about the company? So are you trying to convey a tight-knit small group or an established entity? A general rule of thumb, if it's a fundraising pitch, you probably want to use we to show that you're part of a tight team, and if it's a sales pitch, you may want to go with the company because you're representing something larger than yourself. But focus on it for a minute, figure it out, and use that in your messages. And the last point I just want to say on this is the unity factor. This is actually quite critical and extends beyond the pitch. It's really important that everyone on the team is aware of and understands your key messages. So whether they're updating their bios in LinkedIn or chatting with somebody at the grocery store or taking a phone call, having everyone on the same page is really essential. it reflects transparency in the company, it ensures everyone outside the company doesn't form a wrong opinion of you, and it helps prevent any accidental disclosures or false or outdated information from circulating. So try to make sure everyone's aware of what your core messages are. Matching your message to the audience is actually, worth thinking about as well, because you're gonna be speaking to different people, and you may want to, switch it up, especially in your pitch. So first thing I want to say is, talk about the tone a little bit. The tone of your message should speak to the culture in the company, but also the world your audience lives in. So find out a little bit about the people you're pitching to. Are they conservative or risk adverse, or are they more ambitious go-getters? So you might want to say something, sort of frame it a little bit differently. Maybe they have a strong association or affiliation to a set of principles or cultural practices. It could be in the form of, say, the way another country does business compared to Canada, or they might subscribe to a specific model or system of doing business. If your audience represents a company, look for the wording on their website. How do they refer to their work? Use their own references. Make the connection. If the VCs you're pitching all have a background in startup culture, look at the terminology and culture of that space. Consider some of the success stories they may have witnessed or been connected to. Obviously, you don't want to try too hard, because that might appear insincere, but if it seems like you've done your homework and are matching their culture with your tone, it'll probably be appreciated, even if it's subconscious. Easy on the technical features. This is probably one of the biggest problems with pitches, is that they're too technical for the audience, especially if it's a technical topic that your business is based in. If they are technical, go there a bit, but don't dwell on the tech. Bring it back to the problem and the solution. That's really what sells. And don't assume that the people that you're talking to know as much as they may indicate. You live and breathe this stuff, whereas the customers or investors are in the business of business, not technology necessarily. So the other thing is to remember that if you go over people's heads, they may be embarrassed to ask for deeper explanations, and you'll have hurt your chances at getting a bite. You want to avoid statements that people know aren't true, like there's nobody else doing this. You want to avoid explanations that are too complex for them to understand, but again, don't be patronizing here. Don't, try to avoid inconsistencies, especially when it comes to your numbers. And of course, obviously it goes without saying, you want to avoid typos and errors, because if you can't put an error-free presentation together, how can you build a company? There's some characteristics that you want to convey, integrity. This is probably the most important one. You're proposing going into business with them, so you want to show that. Passion, because if you're not passionate, why should they be? Experience, knowledge, skills, leadership, commitment, vision, realism. Realism is a good one too. Like don't have crazy ideas, and show that you understand where your business fits. And coachability, it's a big one too. You want to show that you're flexible, that you can work with them. But of course, you can't just say, hey, I've got integrity, I'm passionate. You need to convey these things through the pitch itself and your messaging. So partly that's done through your brand and your presentation style, which is the next two sections we're going to quickly go over. All right, let's take a quick breather for a sec. So on to section 5, identity, branding, slide design. What you put out in the world will form your identity, your visual branding, your website, the messages you write and say, and eventually the experiences people have when dealing with you. You can't design all your interactions, but you can have a good elevator speech, follow through on your word, and know your stuff. And you can design a big part of the feeling people get when experiencing your brand and hearing your message. So let's talk about that for a sec. With visual branding, there's basically, this is the first touch people have. There's a good chance that the first experience they have with you or your company will be your logo, business card, website, email signature. It's subtle and subconscious, but it sets the expectations and projects an image that puts you in the category, into a certain category in somebody's head. So the main points here are color, font, shape, alignment, concept variations, and consistency. I'm going to go through this really quick. Again, you can come back and rewatch the webinar if you want to get deeper into this. But really quickly, see if you can pick out what brand I've got here. So we've got this red, we've got this white, lock in the color. Next, you got a font. Maybe you already know now. It's a pretty common brand, pretty distinct font. by now you see that shape. It's a swoosh. You know what it is. You've seen this. Everybody knows it's that simple shape has somehow lasted through all these years. Alignment. Don't overlook this. You want to stick with either center or left align generally when you're producing marketing materials. Concept variations. If you're producing multiple things that are supposed to look different, you want to have these like elements that carry through. And of course, consistency. No matter what you put out there in the world, you want to make sure you got your colors, you got your fonts, you've got everything kind of locked in, and you have this look and feel so there's never any confusion. This really helps with the sort of help you look professional. All right, well, I better keep going here. I'm just going to burn through this next stuff. You can see there's all these different ideas with the, color psychology. This is stuff you can look up online, but it's worth taking a moment, picking your colors. Fonts convey a lot of different meanings, subtle sort of subconscious meaning, depending on what font you choose. When it comes to logos, you want to match expectations and still somehow stand out. What I mean by that is that if you didn't know any of these companies and you just glanced at them and didn't even, speak English, you'd probably be able to figure out that they're all sort of within a certain sector or industry. Again, why? Because they have a certain look and feel, and that's all sort of the subconscious, subtle stuff. But that's what I mean by matching expectations. You don't want to look like a fast food restaurant if you're trying to start a solar panel company. Quickly on the logos, you've got icons, you've got word marks with symbols, letter marks, emblems. But key point here is unless you're a popular consumer brand looking for that store shelf recognition factor, you probably don't need to invest as much time as you think in a really iconic logo. Just a simple logo type or word mark is probably fine. Maybe a little symbol, but again, keep it simple. I grabbed these off the Global Affairs Canada website, and I thought this was like just one screenshot, and I thought it was a really good sort of a batch of logos, because even if you don't know any of these companies, they're all clean, they're all very well designed, and again, you can probably all imagine what sort of world they're coming from because they have a certain look and feel. So quickly, just a few things you want to avoid. Obviously, illegibility is a big one. Don't try to look futuristic, because whatever you think things will look like in the future, by the time we get there, stuff won't look like that, and your branding will be dated. You don't want to look too techy. It's going to sort of isolate yourself a little bit. The whole eco and earthy thing as well could signify a bit of compromise with the quality. So let the specs, let the performance of your product sort of speak to the environmental credentials. You don't want too many details, in a logo or a branding, and all the gloss and bubbles and reflections and overly stylized stuff. You can basically skip that too. What you are going for is sort of timelessness. Look at the old stuff. Look at the things that have lasted and see what characteristics they have. Precision. You want things to really be tight. Make sure your pieces line up. This is it sort of speaks to the quality of your overall company and your approach. Less is more, obviously, and again, probably global. You don't want to just be the local company. You're trying to grow big, so make sure you're sort of beyond that. All right, we're moving into design tips for your slide deck. It's a little bit of a funny comparison. It's not totally fair because probably the Microsoft one comes from a good decade earlier, but it's a good example of sort of what you want to go for. Less is more. Short bullet points, good. Just the headlines, even better. And if possible, show it. A little bit of contrast, just to jump to a different type of layout or slide. This is probably not what you want to do when you're putting your slide deck together. Don't write what you're going to say. You don't want paragraph text. Keep it on brand. Keep the decorations to a minimum. Keep a couple consistent heading sizes to establish good hierarchy. Just a few bullet points per idea, because you don't want somebody reading while you're talking, or else they won't be able to focus on you. And you probably all read that as I was reading it, and just I heard the voice in your head instead of mine. So it's just a good little example. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on graphics. First glance, nothing really wrong with this. Kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of some stats, but it's pretty cluttered and over-designed if you look at it. So look at this next one. And believe it or not, there is nothing that the first one shows that the second one doesn't. The second slide shows the exact same information. And obviously, you spend less time looking around and trying to figure out what you're missing when you see the second one, because it's just got the information. So as a general rule, strip away all the superfluous little extra design elements. Just focus on the key, the data, the core of it. One more point on the slide design, or the deck design, I guess, is don't create it as a standalone document. It's totally fine if it's not easily readable when you're not around. So if you circulate an executive summary of your business plan for that purpose, and if you prepare a handout, don't make it a printout of your presentation. All right, on to the final part, delivering your presentation. I just want to go over a few best practices. Stuff should be probably pretty obvious. Whether baseball or business, pitching is not just tossing or lobbing. It's carefully, strategically delivering to an intended target. So, how do you do that? Rehearse. It's very easy for your pitch to stretch over time if you're not on point. Note to self, people have a limited attention span. Tell people you're going to start a couple minutes before you start. Start on time, take control, talk first. Don't wait for somebody else to prompt you. The first 10 to 30 seconds is really critical. You have to get their attention immediately. If you don't grab people within the first minute, they're going to start checking their email. Start with your fact, your story, your experience, something surprising or counterintuitive. Try to grab their emotional attention right away. Ask a question, force the engagement, then take them on a solid, steady upward path. Basically, you're trying to present a logical progression, why, how, everything related to your company and your value proposition. Include some touchstones. Make sure there's a few reference points that people can relate to. Validate your idea. Validate the business model. Talk about your sales, your awards, your past successes, beta tests that have gone well. And again, believable. It has to be good, but it can't be far-fetched. Don't read from the screen. Read from your notes while you're facing the audience. You should have your view of PowerPoint set in the presenter mode so you can see the slides ahead of you and behind you in your notes. Use a remote control if you want. Feel free to move around. Don't pace. Don't fidget. Have a clock, easily visible. Keep track of your timing, and finish strong. Know how you're going to end. Be definitive about it. Say your last line, and then don't feel like you need to keep talking. And then be ready to listen carefully, and be ready to answer questions based on the details in your business plan. Almost done here. 3 factors to consider. Nonverbal communication. Really important. Eye contact, smiling, your pose, whether you're relaxed, enthusiastic. Show your passion. Don't talk while you're looking at your slides. Some studies suggest that more than half of your success in getting your message across is nonverbal. With the verbal stuff, the auditive aspects are really critical. The way you speak, your volume, your intonation, these things are important. Pace yourself. Pause for effect and retention. Make sure you're loud enough. Use lots of intonation. And finally, your product or service specs and features matter much less than you think at this point. Make sure everyone can understand what you do. What's the problem? How do you solve it? Where's the money? And finally, rehearse some more. Try to get feedback, video yourself, whatever. Last point here, I just want to talk about quickly a little bit on the psychology. This is something I pulled from somebody else. People want what they can't have, they chase what moves away from them, and they value what they pay for. So try to use these to your advantage. Investors are already prepped to say no, so how can you hijack that process? Of course, you don't want to come across as psychologically manipulative. That'll work against you, but the point here is to exude confidence and not seem desperate. Some people might say, oh, you should just be yourself and present the numbers and let the value speak for itself, but really, that's not actually a good idea. Every profession requires preparation, training, and refining for the big moments. You're probably not good enough without practice. So, think of elite athletes at game time. They don't sit around in the locker room and tell each other to just go out there and be themselves. They get pumped, they get in the zone, they put on their game face, whatever it might be. It's not their day-to-day persona. Build rapport. Know who you're pitching to. Make a connection. And remember, finally, data and information lays the foundation for what you're saying, but it really has very little convincing power. The specs and the numbers won't be the reason your pitch or your business succeeds. Likely the investors already know a bit about the market, so you have to give them some new ideas. You have to inspire them. So there we go. That sums it up. We've kind of covered all the things that I'm going to cover, so I just want to thank again Globe for giving me the opportunity to present all that. I'll hand it over to Mark again.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate all that excellent information. And for those of you on the webinar, I'm sure you can appreciate the amount of preparation that it takes to put together a solid and a core pitch, whether it's from a presentation perspective or whether it's financing information that you need to research. These are all excellent and very important points that need to be taken into consideration. And so if, as a follow-up, you're obviously wondering, how can I put this into practice without talking to an actual investor? It's always good to practice. But practicing in front of your family or your friends is very different than actually practicing in front of strangers. And so Globe is actually quite excited to let you know about an upcoming workshop that, in essence, acts as a follow-up to this particular webinar. We will be holding and we are looking forward to inviting you to a follow-up workshop live in person, and it'll be taking place in Vancouver on Wednesday, April 5th. And it's hosted by the Vancouver Economic Commission, so in partnership with Globe. On your screens right now, you'll see an opportunity to click on a link that will take you to that registration page if you are interested. And of course, we will be following up with you. So if you don't get the link, if you're not able to click on that and take down the information, we will be following up by email to provide you with all the information. So definitely an excellent opportunity to have practice your pitch in front of a live panel of business professionals and also some of the general public that may be interested, the business community, so to speak. You'll be able to have about 15 minutes to prepare a pitch. There'll be a short discussion, questions and answers from the panel, and an excellent way of getting some real practice before you approach your prospective investor. So thank you very much. We do look forward to welcoming you to that on, again, Wednesday, April 5th.
50 minutes to deliver your pitch, not to prepare. You have to prepare in advance.
Great.
Maybe we have a couple questions we want to go through?
Yes, that's all really, really good stuff, gentlemen. And we do have some questions that come in that I'll lead you in on. First one is, what is the best time to seek an investor?
Well, it's a very good question. I think a lot of us are obviously starting off. Our businesses are at various stages of the business. I think what's really important to make sure that obviously we're well prepared and that you actually have a business. So it's not just an idea. You don't want to approach an investor just with an idea, because there's thousands of ideas out there. So an investor really is looking to see a business that's up and running. So you should be able to show, cash flow, know exactly what you're looking for, what your needs are for the company. There's another, aspect of investment as well, is what type of investment in your company are you looking? Is it just cash? Is it a combination of cash and business expertise? So a lot of these questions are really important. You need to ask yourself beforehand, what are you actually looking for? And make sure that, of course, you are absolutely ready to engage, because an investor ultimately is seeking to invest in a fully functional company that is up and running.
Yeah, I would just add that basically, if this pitch is a great sort of template to gauge your readiness by, and if you can't speak to all the points that we kind of reviewed in the sort of anatomy of a pitch section, if you don't have that ready to go and you can speak to that stuff confidently, probably you're not quite ready yet. So, as soon as you have all those things, then you're good to go. It's probably also not a bad idea to seek some advice within the investment community first. Talk to somebody who's gone through the process, and they'll have some good insights, I'm sure, around that as well. As far as maybe you want to have somebody in this world sort of give your business plan a review before you tell you, oh, you should spend a bit more time on this before you pitch or something like that.
And of course, Globe Advisors and Big Picture Communication are both available for having those conversations, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So the next question that comes about here is how much do investors expect to get in return?
Yeah. Well,
the $1 million question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think if you look at it from an investor's perspective, you have to ask yourself, if I as an investor want to take let's say it's $1,000, just to be very minimal, if I go out and need to invest that, what rate of return would I get under something that is absolutely without risk? Because ultimately, when you're investing in a new startup, a new company, there's a significant amount of risk. And so an investor is always looking to be compensated for that type of risk, and particularly the added risk of a small startup. So for that reason, of course, they're very interested in the activities and the numbers. So they obviously want to be compensated well above and beyond what they could normally do. So if they're looking at options, where do I put my money? If I put it here, I'll get X percent. If I put it in another company, Y percent. So they definitely want to make sure that they're balancing risk versus return. And so there isn't necessarily a set number, but studies have shown that in certain cases, angel investors, for example, have sought a return of somewhere around 2 to 2.5 times their original capital over a course of about 3.5 years. Again, that's not a fixed or ready formula. There are a lot of studies out there that try to determine what an appropriate amount of return or rate of return is for risk. So very tricky to pinpoint, but hopefully that'll give you some indication.
That's great, Mark.
A bit more than you're willing to offer. It not to say Dragon's Den is a good real life example, but if you watch it ever, usually they ask for quite a bit. They want a lot back, and it's often quite shocking, I think, for people to see, like, but you got to think about where you're at, and could you make a go out of it without them? And if you can't, then what are your options? So that might be your best option, is to give up a good chunk of your company or ask for lots left.
That's great comments there. We have time for about one more before our hour mark here, and so I'll just toss out. I'll choose one here. So after the principal is paid back, after the principal investment is paid back, do investors typically receive dividends or something else for their investment on a continual basis?
That's totally dependent on the deal you sign.
Yeah, I think each agreement, investment agreement, would obviously could be customized, and so as some of us may have seen, whether it's on the type of Dragon's Den environment where you see investors negotiating with the company, there's a number of different options that are available. So that really is something that is very customizable, and in many cases, investors do look for additional dividends if they see that if you're producing something, if you're in the manufacturing business and sales are booming, they would like to see a piece of that. But it's not a fast and hard rule, but you can probably be assured that investors are obviously very savvy. They want to make sure that their money is being invested in the most appropriate way and most effective and high yield, with the highest yield possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings us to about the end of our hour mark here. So on behalf of Momentum Conferencing and Globe Advisors and Big Picture Communication, I would like to thank all of the participants that stayed here until the end. And there are some more questions. Everything will be answered back. If you have any questions before I close down the webinar, please type them now into the question and answer area, and they will be saved and sent out to you via email. Are there any last thoughts, either Jason or Mark?
No, that's great. I'd just encourage anybody, if they want to discuss anything, their specific situation in more detail, just reach out. We're happy to keep the conversation going offline.
Sure, and I think really just being very knowledgeable about your business, doing the research, doing the due diligence. I know there's often a feeling that, we're all very excited about our business. We want to move forward. A lot of times we don't do the preparation that we should. So really the key is making sure that we prepare as best possible, do the research, talk to your peers, get as much insight and information before you actually talk to the most important person, which would be your business, which would be the investor or the prospective client that you're looking to pitch to. So absolutely important.
Fantastic. As mentioned, once again, this will be available. Anybody that's registered for this event will get an email that will lead you to that play-on-demand recording. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, William.
All right. Bye, everyone.